Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are tackling a subject that, quite honestly, has achieved a level of cultural saturation that I don't think anyone could have predicted 10, maybe even 5 years ago.
Oh, absolutely not.
I mean, you see it in blockbuster movies, you see it in hit TV shows like Stranger Things, and you see it being played by massive celebrities on Twitch. We are, of course, talking about the grandfather of them all, Dungeons and Dragons.
It is everywhere now. And it is fascinating because for the longest time, this was the exact definition of niche. It
Yeah.
was the ultimate basement hobby. And now it's a billion-dollar brand.
Exactly. And that is the tension we are going to explore today. I've been reading through this massive stack of documents you sent over, the history, the business analysis, the accounts of the various controversies. And the thing that just blows my mind is the sheer improbability of it all. We are talking about a game that started in 1974 with a production budget of, what, $2,000?
Yeah, $2,000. And only about $100 of that actually went to the artwork.
Which explains a lot if you've ever seen that original white box.
Right.
But seriously, this is a game based on arithmetic, on improvisation, and on these funny-shaped dice. By all logic, it should have been a passing fad. Instead, it survived the satanic panic of the 80s, it survived corporate bankruptcy in the 90s, and it survived the entire digital revolution, which was, supposed to make pen and paper games completely obsolete.
And not only survived, but thrived. It is essentially the cockroach of pop culture, and I mean that in the best possible way.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to unpack that survival story. We're going to look at the origins in the wargaming scene, the actual mechanics that make it tick, the wild business decisions that almost killed it, and the modern corporate wars that are defining its future right now.
And we have to answer the big question, really.
Here.
How does a game that requires you to read 300 pages of rules before you even start playing become the coolest thing in entertainment?
Let's start at the very beginning. Yeah. Section 1, the origin story. Because before there were dungeons, and before there were dragons, there were war games. And the sources paint a picture of a gaming landscape in the late 60s and early 70s that was, well, it was very different from the chaotic energy of a modern D&D table.
It was incredibly different. To understand D&D, you really have to understand its parents. We are talking about miniature wargaming. This was a hobby for hardcore history buffs. You would have this massive table, often covered in sand or green felt, to represent the terrain. You'd have model trees, little hills, and hundreds of tiny lead miniatures representing historical armies.
Like Napoleonic, Civil War, ancient Rome, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And the key thing to understand here is the mindset. In a war game, you are a general. You are standing above the battlefield looking down. You are moving an entire regiment of infantry or a squadron of cavalry. You aren't playing John the Soldier. You're playing the 5th Battalion.
So it's very detached. It's a simulation.
It is a rigid simulation.
Right.
You literally have tape measures to check movement distances. You have complex charts to calculate artillery fire trajectories. If a unit takes damage, you remove a figure, but you don't mourn him. He's just a casualty marker on a board.
So the sources mention a specific game called Chainmail as the bridge between this rigid historical world and the fantasy world.
Chainmail is the critical link here. It was published in 1971 by Gary Gygax and Jeff Perrin. Now, Gygax is a name we are going to hear a lot today. He was based in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Chainmail was, at its core, a medieval war game. Knights, archers, catapults.
Just standard historical stuff.
Mostly, yeah. But Gygax did something really interesting. He added a fantasy supplement at the very back of the book. He loved pulp fantasy stories, Conan the Barbarian, Lord of the Rings. So he wrote rules for what happens if you put a dragon on the battlefield, or a wizard who can throw a fireball like it's an artillery shell.
But even then, you're still playing a war game, right? I mean, the wizard is just a tank with a pointy hat.
Precisely. You are still commanding units. The psychological shift, the actual spark that created role-playing games, came from a different guy entirely. Dave Arneson.
Yes, this is the part of the history I find most compelling in the sources, the Bronstein games.
This is deep lore, but it is so essential. Arneson was part of a group in the Twin Cities playing these highly experimental games run by a guy named David Weasley. The scenario was a fictional town called Bronstein during the Napoleonic Wars. But instead of commanding armies, Weasley gave the players individual roles. He'd say, you are the mayor, you are the student radical, you are the colonel.
So the objective isn't capture the hill, it's, I don't know, keep the town from rioting or distribute these pamphlets.
Exactly. And Arneson loved this. He realized that the fun wasn't in the geometry of the cannon fire, it was in the negotiation, the bluffing, the inhabiting of a persona. So he took that individual concept and applied it to his own fantasy setting, which he called Blackmore.
And this is the aha moment. He uses the chainmail rules for combat because they work mathematically, but he changes the scale from an army to a 1-to-1 ratio.
That is the birth of the RPG right there. The shift from unit to character. Arneson introduced concepts that we completely take for granted now. He introduced the idea that if you survive a dungeon, you get stronger. You gain experience points, you level up, you have hit points that replenish.
He essentially invented the save game and the skill tree before video games even existed.
He really did. He created a continuous narrative. In a war game, once the battle is over, you reset the board. In Arneson's Blackmore, if you killed the dragon stayed dead next week. Your actions had permanence.
So Arneson has this wild, imaginative mess of a game in Blackmore. Gygax has the publishing drive and the wargaming structure over in Lake Geneva. And they meet up.
Right. Arneson travels to Lake Geneva and runs a game for Gygax. And Gygax, to his credit, immediately sees the brilliance of it.
Yeah.
He realizes this isn't just a variant of wargaming, it's a completely new medium. They agree to collaborate. They call it the fantasy game, initially. Gygax takes the lead on codifying the rules, organizing all the tables, and turning Arneson's improvisational style into a marketable product.
And we have to talk about the name. Because the fantasy game is just terrible.
It is incredibly bland. The story goes that Gygax had a list of potential titles. He didn't run a focus group or hire a marketing firm. He read the list to his 2-year-old daughter, Cindy.
A 2-year-old?
A toddler, yeah. And she heard the list and apparently said, "Oh, Daddy, I like Dungeons & Dragons best."
That is incredible. A 2-year-old girl named the most masculine, nerdy property of the 20th century.
It's perfect, though. It perfectly describes the two core elements, the setting, which is the dungeon, and the antagonist, the dragon.
So they launch in 1974. They form a company called Tactical Studies Rules, or TSR. And we mentioned the budget earlier, $2,000. What did the actual product look like? Because I think for you listening, you probably imagine the glossy hardcovers we have today.
Oh, not even close.
Yeah.
The original Dungeons & Dragons, what fans call OD&D, or the white box, was 3 little staple-bound booklets inside a wood-grain colored cardboard box. It looked like something you'd print at a local church bake sale.
And the rules were cryptic, to say the least.
Cryptic is being generous. The text assumed you were already a hardcore wargamer. It referred you to the chainmail rulebook for combat. It referred you to a completely different board game called Outdoor Survival, just for wilderness travel. It was disorganized, the art was amateurish, and there were typos everywhere.
And yet
it was magic. Because despite the mess, the promise of total freedom was there. You could do anything. You weren't limited by the buttons on a controller or the spaces on a board.
the viral growth mentioned in the sources is just staggering. They sell 1,000 copies in year 1, 3,000 in year 2.
It spread like a contagion through college campuses and high schools. One person would buy the box, learn the rules, and then run a game for 5 friends. Those 5 friends would get hooked, buy their own boxes, and run games for 5 more people. It was exponential growth, driven purely by the quality of the experience.
Okay, before we get into the business drama, and oh boy, the documents show there is a lot of drama, let's actually explain the game. Because we keep saying total freedom, but there are rules. For the listener who has never sat at a table, what is the core loop?
At its heart, D&D is a conversation loop. It has a specific rhythm. You have the dungeon master, the DM, and you have the players.
The DM is the computer, basically.
Yes, the DM is the CPU and the graphics card. They describe the reality. They say, you stand in a dripping stone corridor. There is a wooden door to the north and a goblin sleeping on a chair to the south.
And the players don't have a menu of options. They just say what they want to do.
Right. A player says, I want to sneak up on the goblin and tie his shoelaces together. That is the intention.
And this is where the game mechanics kick in. Because you can't just say, I win.
Exactly. The DM determines the difficulty of that action, and usually they ask for a roll. This introduces the element of chance, which creates tension.
Let's talk about the hardware here. The dice, the polyhedrals.
The math rocks. You have the D4, D6, D8, G10, D12, and the absolute star of the show, the D20.
Why the D20? Why does everything revolve around that specific shape?
It comes out of probability. In wargaming, they often use 6-sided dice, the D6. But the probability curve of a D6 is chunky. A D20 allows for 5% increments. Gives you a much wider range of outcomes, from a critical miss if you roll a 1 to a critical hit if you roll a 20. It feels much more granular.
So the mechanic is roll a D20, add a number from your character sheet, and try to beat a target number the DM has in their head.
That is 90% of the game right there. Armor class is just the target number you need to hit to damage someone. Difficulty class is the target number to pick a lock.
And those numbers you add come from your ability scores.
Strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. These 6 stats are iconic. They define who your character is. A barbarian has high strength, but maybe low intelligence. A bard has high charisma.
It effectively quantifies a personality.
It does. It gamifies human capability.
I also want to touch on progression, because the sources emphasize this as a key addictive element of the design.
This is the Skinner box element. You do things, kill monsters, solve riddles, and you get a reward. Experience points, or XP. You accumulate enough, and you level up. Your numbers go up, you get new powers. It creates a incredibly powerful sense of investment. You aren't just playing a game, you are building something over months or even years.
And that leads to the difference between an adventure and a campaign.
Think of it like television. An adventure is a single episode. There is a problem, you solve it, credits roll. A campaign is the entire series. It's the same cast of characters going through arc after arc. A campaign can last for years of real time. I have known groups that have played the same campaign for decades.
That is real commitment. Okay, so we have the game. It's growing. It is 1977. And this is where TSR makes a business decision that, reading about it now in the source material, feels absolutely baffling. They split the game into 2 incompatible product lines.
The two-pronged strategy. It is one of the most confusing eras in the game's history. From 1977 to 1999, D&D wasn't one game. It was 2.
Break it down for us. What were the prongs?
Prong 1 was basic Dungeons & Dragons. This was the famous red box you might have seen in Stranger Things. It was sold in toy stores. It was aimed at younger players. The rules were streamlined, edited by a guy named John Eric Holmes, and later refined by Moldvay and Menser. It was D&D Lite.
And prong 2.
Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, or AD&D. These were the hardcover books, the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Monster Manual. This was for the serious hobbyist. It was rules-heavy, structured, complex, gritty.
But the crazy part is that they weren't compatible, right? You couldn't just take your character from the basic game and play in an advanced game.
Not without a lot of conversion work. The math was different. The way classes worked was different. In basic, elf was a class. You were just an elf. In advanced, you were an elf fighter or an elf wizard.
Why would they fracture their own audience like that?
Well, there's the official reason, which was market segmentation. One game for casuals, one for hardcore gamers.
Yeah.
But there was also a widely believed theory about royalties.
Follow the money.
Always. Dave Arneson, the co-creator, was entitled to royalties on Dungeons & Dragons. Gygax argued that Advanced Dungeons & Dragons was a completely different game, and therefore Arneson wasn't entitled to the same royalties on that line.
That is incredibly cynical.
It was a highly litigious time. Arneson eventually sued, and they settled, but that split defined the game for 20 years. It created a massive amount of confusion in the market.
And speaking of confusion, let's talk about the content changes. The sources mentioned that when AD&D 2nd Edition came out in 1989, it was strangely sanitized.
It was. They made some very deliberate changes. They removed the assassin class entirely. They removed the half-orc species. And most notably, they removed all demons and devils from the monster manual.
Wait, no demons in a game that is fundamentally about fighting evil?
They renamed them. Demons became Tanari, and devils became Batizu. They were desperately trying to hide the occult references.
And this wasn't an artistic choice at all. This was a survival tactic. Because we have to talk about the elephant in the room from the 1980s, the satanic panic.
We really do. If you are under the age of 40, it is hard to explain just how intense this was. This wasn't just parents think video games make you lazy. This was mainstream media and major religious organizations genuinely believing that D&D was an instruction manual for witchcraft.
It sounds so ludicrous now.
It was a full-blown moral panic,
Oh.
and it was sparked by a specific tragedy that the media just latched onto, the case of James Dallas Egbert III.
Walk us through this. This is 1979.
Yes. James Dallas Egbert III was a student at Michigan State University. He was a prodigy, only 16 years old, but he was dealing with a lot of intense pressure. He was struggling with drug abuse, he was closeted, and he was suffering from severe depression. He went missing.
And his family hires a private investigator.
William Deere. And this PI finds out that Egbert played D&D. And he cooks up this sensational theory for the press. He tells reporters that Egbert had gone into the steam tunnels under the university to play a live-action version of D&D and had gotten lost or had a psychotic break.
The steam tunnel myth, I have heard this.
It was pure fiction. Egbert was actually hiding in a friend's house. The game had absolutely nothing to do with his disappearance, Tragically, he did eventually die by suicide a year later, but again, it was due to mental health struggles, not a fantasy game.
Yeah, but the narrative was out there. The damage was done.
It was too good a story to check. It inspired a novel called Mazes and Monsters, which became a TV movie starring a very young Tom Hanks. The movie depicts a college student who plays the game, loses his mind, thinks he is a cleric, and tries to jump off the World Trade Center to fly.
Wow, that is subtle.
It terrified parents. You had organizations like BADD Bothered about Dungeons and Dragons, founded by Patricia Pulling. She went on 60 Minutes, she was on Geraldo, claiming that D&D was a literal recruitment tool for satanic cults.
So you have the church, the media, and parents all attacking the game. This should have killed TSR entirely.
But here is the massive irony, the Streisand effect. The more they told kids, this game is dangerous, it's a cult, it's forbidden, the more kids wanted to play it.
It gave the game an edge. It became rebellious.
Exactly. Sales peaked in 1982 and 1983, right at the height of the panic. They were selling millions of copies. The controversy bought them a level of publicity they never could have afforded otherwise.
And just to set the record straight, because we always try to look at all the source material impartially, the sources do mention actual scientific research on this.
Yes. In the years since, studies by the CDC, the American Association of Suicidology, and psychologists like Armando Simon have looked deeply into this. They found zero correlation between D&D and suicide or emotional instability.
In fact, modern research suggests the exact opposite, right?
Correct. It suggests D&D improves socialization. It teaches empathy, teamwork, and problem solving. It turns out that spending your Friday night cooperatively solving complex puzzles with your friends is actually good for your brain.
Who knew? So TSR survives the panic, but they can't survive their own bad business habit.
No, they really couldn't. By the late 90s, the two-pronged strategy and the massive flood of different products had caught up with them. They were publishing way too many books, splitting their audience into smaller and smaller factions, and drowning in debt. By 1997, TSR was functionally bankrupt. They couldn't even pay their printers to make the books.
Enter the White Knight, or the Dark Wizard, depending on your perspective, Wizards of the Coast.
Wizard of the Coast, or Woody C., was a Seattle-based company that had struck absolute gold with Magic the Gathering. They had cash. So they bought TSR in 1997, and this marks the beginning of the modern era.
Their first big move was 3rd edition in the year 2000. And reading the analysis, this wasn't just a rules update. It was a fundamental shift in how the entire RPG industry worked.
It was. First, they finally reunited the game. No more basic versus advanced, just Dungeons and Dragons. They streamlined the rules around the D20 system. But the real revolution was legal, not mechanical. The open game license, or OGL.
I want to spend a moment here because this is a business strategy that seems totally counterintuitive at first glance. What exactly was the OGL?
Ryan Dancy, the brand manager at WOTC, had a theory. He looked at the software industry and the open source movement. He decided to apply that to tabletop games. The OGL effectively said, here are the core mathematical rules of D&D. Anyone can use them. You can write your own adventures, your own settings, your own games using our engine, and you don't have to pay us a dime.
Why give away the engine? That sounds like terrible business.
The network effect. The idea was that if everyone is making content for the D20 system, then D20 becomes the universal language of RPGs. And since Wizards owns the core brand, the player's handbook, everyone will eventually have to buy that book to play all this other cool stuff that other people are making.
It's the razor and blades model, but they let other people make the blades.
Exactly. And it worked phenomenally well. It created a massive boom. The market was flooded with D20 products. It cemented D&D as the absolute king of the hill.
But looking at the history here, it was a double-edged sword. Because when Wizards stumbled later on, that license came back to bite them.
That brings us to 2008 and 4th edition.
The controversial edition.
Highly controversial. Wizards tried to patch the game. They saw the massive rise of World of Warcraft and tried to make D&D play a bit more like an MMO. It was very tactical, very balanced, very focused on grid combat.
And the fans hated it.
It was very polarizing. Many felt it lost the soul of the game, the improvisation, the theater of the mind. It felt like a rigid board game again. And because of the OGL from the previous edition, a rival company, Paizo, saw a huge opening.
Paizo was publishing D&D magazine content previously, right?
Yes. And when Wizards switched to 4th edition, Paizo said, hey, we know a lot of you hate this new version, so we are going to keep publishing the old version 3.5 with a fresh coat of paint. They called it Pathfinder.
And because of the open game license, Wizards legally couldn't stop them.
They had legally given away the keys to the castle. And for several years, Pathfinder actually outsold Dungeons& and Dragons. It was a major embarrassment for the market leader.
Which forces a huge course correction. And that brings us to 2014 and 5th edition, the Renaissance.
5th edition is the version most listeners probably know today. Wizards learned their lesson. They spent years playtesting it with 75,000 volunteers.
That is a massive sample size for a tabletop game.
They wanted to know what D&D actually felt like to the community. And the result was a system that stripped away the heavy math of 3rd edition and the rigid tactics of 4th edition. It went back to the philosophy of rulings, not rules.
Yeah.
It empowered the DM again.
And the timing was just perfect, because just as they released this accessible, story-focused version of the game, the entire culture shifts.
We have to talk about the actual play phenomena.
Critical Role.
Critical Role, the Adventure Zone, Dimension 20. Suddenly, you had professional voice actors and comedians playing D&D on Twitch and YouTube.
I think this is the key to the modern boom. Before this, if you want to know what D&D was, you had to find a group of nerds in a basement and awkwardly ask to join. It was intimidating.
Exactly. Now, you've just opened YouTube. You watch Matt Mercer tell a story. You see these professional actors crying, laughing, screaming. You realize, oh, it's not just math. It's collaborative storytelling. It completely demystified the hobby.
The sources cite some wild numbers here. In 2020, viewers watched 150 million hours of D&D content.
It turned a participatory hobby into a spectator sport.
Yeah.
That is a fundamental shift in the business model.
Plus, you have Stranger Things putting the red box on screen in front of millions of Netflix subscribers.
And framing it not as satanic, but as the thing that bonds these heroic kids together.
Yeah.
It reclaimed the cultural narrative.
So D&D is on top of the world. Sales are up 40% in 2017, 52% in 2018. But whenever there's this much money on the table, things get complicated. And the last few years have been really rocky.
Rocky is putting it mildly. The relationship between the community and the corporation has become very strained.
Let's dive into the OGL 1.1 debacle in 2023. We just spent time praising the OGL for building the industry. Why did they try to kill it?
Greed and control, basically.
Yeah.
Wizards of the Coast is owned by Hasbro. Hasbro is a massive toy conglomerate. They looked at D&D and saw a lot of people making money off their intellectual property using that old license.
This is where the under-monetized quote comes in.
Yes. In a fireside chat, Hasbro executives described D&D as under-monetized. They compared it to video games, where they can sell cosmetic skins and battle passes. They wanted to squeeze more revenue out of the user base.
So they tried to revoke the old license and force creators to sign a new, highly restrictive one that demanded royalties.
And the community revolted. It was instant and unified. It wasn't just angry tweets, it was wallet voting. Tens of thousands of people canceled their subscriptions to D&D Beyond, which is the official digital toolset. It literally crashed their unsubscribe page.
They hit them where it hurts, the recurring revenue.
And it worked. Hasbro capitulated completely. They not only withdrew the new license, but they released the core rules of 5th edition into the Creative Commons.
Explain the significance of that for the listener. Creative Commons.
It means the text of the game mechanics now belongs to the public. Hasbro can never, ever try to take it back. It is irrevocably free for anyone to use forever. It was a total victory for the fans.
But the tension remains. We see it in the layoffs.
That's the really bitter pill.
Yep.
2023 was the biggest year in the brand's history. You had Baldur's Gate 3, which swept all the Game of the Year awards. You had the movie Honor Among Thieves, which was critically acclaimed. And yet, Hasbro laid off 1,100 people, including many of the veteran designers who built 5th edition. They even cut 90% of the team working on their new virtual tabletop.
It feels like a massive disconnect. The brand is flourishing, but the people making it are being treated like line items on a spreadsheet.
It reinforces that feeling of community versus corporation.
There was also the inclusion controversy with Spelljammer. And remember, we're just reporting what is in the documents here.
Yes, the Heidozi issue. They released a space fantasy setting that included a race of monkey people, the Heidozi. The backstory provided for them had uncomfortable parallels to real-world slavery narratives, and the artwork was criticized for resembling minstrel imagery.
How did that happen in 2022?
It was a failure of editorial oversight. They apologized and scrubbed the content from digital versions and future printings, but it led to a policy change. They now require cultural consultants on every product. And notably, they stopped using the word race in the game.
Right. In the new 2024 books, it is referred to as species.
Which brings us to the present day, the 2024 revision, Project 1 D&D.
What is happening right now? Is this 6th edition?
They're very careful not to call it that. They insist it is revised 5th edition. They do not want to split the player base again like they did back in 2008, but they are releasing new versions of the player's handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and Monster Manual.
But there's a brain drain mentioned in the notes.
This is the thing to watch. The architects of 5th edition, Jeremy Crawford, Chris Perkins, are still there, but many others have left. And where are they going? They're going to companies like Darrington Press, which is owned by Critical Role, or MCDM.
The third-party creators are becoming the main rivals.
Exactly. The talent is migrating from the corporation to the community-led studios. It signals a shift in where the creative energy of the hobby truly lives.
So let's wrap this up. We have covered 50 years of history, from a wood grain box to a digital empire. What is the legacy here?
The legacy is that D&D changed how we think about games. It introduced the idea of the party dynamic. It introduced the concept of leveling up and hit points, concepts that are now universal in almost every video game you play. It successfully transitioned from a basement hobby for wargamers to a global entertainment brand streamed by millions.
And as a final thought for you listening, something to chew on based on all these documents, we have this incredible contrast. The game is a creative, community-driven hobby, but it is also a corporate asset deemed under-monetized.
It's a fundamental friction.
Right. And with the core rules now in the Creative Commons and the original creators long gone, you have to ask, does the community even need the official publishers anymore? The game exists in the minds of the players, not just the books sold by Hasbro.
Precisely. As long as you have Guys and Friends, you have D&D. No subscription required.
That is a powerful place to end it. The game belongs to the players. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with me.
Always a pleasure. May all your hits be crits.
And to everyone listening, keep rolling. We'll see you next time.